In this video, just going over a continuation of the last video on how to make our own functions. So let's start with a function that returns a number. So you start with the function keyword and the name of your function, which we'll call our function myNumberFunction. Typically you wouldn't want names this long, but you can name a function whatever you want. And then you will have an open closing parentheses and end function. And really, like if we hit F8 to compile, this is really all you need to make a number function is function, name of your function, open closing parentheses, and then end function once it's over. But this function currently not only does nothing, but it returns nothing. So real quick, let's go over, because I said before in previous video that functions can return something, and basically the return value is what that function equals. So we're going to say by default functions return 0, but you know we want this to return like 5. So we'll say return 5. Now let's print myNumberFunction and hit F8 to compile and F5 to run, and it prints 5. So this function is basically, this whole function call is equal to its return value. So this whole function call right here is basically the same thing as saying print 5. But typically you want a function to do more than that. We're going to make our function add two numbers together. So we need to pass parameters to it. You can pass number or string parameters, and then one other type of parameter which I'll go over at the end of this video. So first, the number parameter is just like a number variable. So like you can just call it A, B, or like, you know, make it a number. Anything that you would name a number variable, you can name, you know, your parameters. So my num1. But for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to call this A, and then we're going to give it a second parameter, which we're going to separate by a comma, and we're going to call the second parameter B. And then instead of returning 5, inside of this function, let's create a variable called C and set it equal to A plus B, and then you can return C. We could have also done return A plus B here, but I wanted to show that you're typically going to have more than just your return statement inside your function. So you can put any amount of code that you want inside this function. So it'll do all this code, and then it's going to return this. But only thing we're going to do for now is just do C equals A plus B and then return C. So now that we have two parameters we need to pass to our function, let's do another myNumberFunction, and for our two parameters we're going to do 3 and 4. And when we pass it, this A right here is going to be replaced with 3, and this B is going to be replaced with 4. So C is going to be equal to 3 plus 4, and it'll return that, which is 7, and we get 7. And that's pretty much it for a number function. Now let's go over a string function. It's the exact same start with the function keyword, and we'll call this myStringFunction. And since it's a string, we're going to put a $sign after the name, and then open and close parentheses, and end function. And this is all we need technically for a string function. So we could do print myStringFunction now, and this will compile and run. And by default, a string function, if you don't set a return value, it just returns an empty string, so it just prints nothing. So we can do like, a return like we did with our function, our number function. So return, and we'll say this. So now, since we're returning this, my string function is going to be equal to this. And this whole thing is basically the equivalent of saying print this. So let's compile that and run it. And we get this. I'm going to use this opportunity now to combine some stuff that we've done in previous tutorials, just kind of to go over it again. So we can have like numbers or string parameters on top of being able to make number and string functions. So we'll make the first parameter a number, we'll call that A, and we'll make the second parameter B, and we'll call it like it'll be a string. Obviously we can't, we've gone over this a few times before, we can't add a number and a string together. So we have to convert one to the other. In this case, we're going to create a string variable called C, and we're going to convert our number A to a string with the str function. So we'll say str A, which is going to be that number converted to a string, plus B. And now we will return C. And now that we have two parameters, first parameter we need to apply to this is a number. And on top of numbers being just integers like we've been using, they can be negative numbers too, which I don't think I've gone over before. But they can also be numbers with decimals, so 5.35. And our string will be this is a string. And up here we're also just going to add a space after the A. So we'll have A space and then B, so there's a space between this and this. I could have also just put a space here inside the string, but just going a little bit more into string expressions also. Let's go ahead and compile that and run it, and we get our number 5.35 and then space, and then this is a string. Next we're going to go over subroutine. So we create a subroutine with this sub keyword, and we'll call this my sub and in sub. Subroutines can't return anything. Like right now that'll compile just fine, but if we try to return a number, like let's return 5, it fails to compile, cannot return a value from a subroutine. And it'll fail also if we try to return a string, so same result. But you can, if you wanted to exit a sub routine early, you can just call return, and that'll exit the sub, and that'll compile. Sometimes you may need to exit a subroutine early, like if you're in an if statement that we will go over later, and it's a value that you've predetermined will exit the subroutine. You can just call return there, and it'll exit the sub. But generally, subroutines are used for just doing stuff, not returning stuff. So we'll just have our subroutine print hello world. And I'm probably going to be calling that hello world stuff a lot because I don't have much of an imagination. So we'll just say my sub. And subroutines are just ran on the lines by themselves. So my sub, and compile that and run it, and it just prints hello world. And that's basically how a subroutine works. The last thing I was going to cover was the other type of parameter you can pass to functions. And you can pass into functions or subs. I'm just going to use a sub for the fact that sub is less typing than function. And we'll call this my sub again. And this type of parameter is called a ByReference parameter, which we're going to make by just saying ByRef, and we'll say A. And I'm going to call this my sub 1, and then my sub 2 is going to be the same type of parameter we've been using. So my sub 2 is going to be actually, you know what, we'll just do it with this one. So we'll just call this my sub. The first thing I'm going to show is what happens when you don't use ByRef. So let's say we wanted to say A equals 5. And then the subroutine just ends. So we're going to create a variable here called my var equals 0. And then my sub, and then we're going to pass my var to it, and then print my var. Now, since we're passing my var to this subroutine, this A is getting replaced with this variable, like this. So right here we're saying that this is going to be equal to 5. But because this is not a ByReference variable, this is a ByValue variable, what this is actually doing is instead of passing the variable to the subroutine, it's just passing the value of the variable. So this is saying 0 in this case, and we're passing that 0 to this variable. Now this A right here is a local variable to the subroutine, so its value does not change. Does not really affect anything outside the subroutine right now. So if we are setting my var to 0, and we're just passing my var to my sub, and then we're just printing my var, and it'll print 0. And that's because right now this subroutine has the value, like we're passing the value to it, the value inside of my var, which is 0, to the subroutine, but we're not passing the reference to the variable itself. Now, if we just add one word, add ByRef to this, now all of a sudden, instead of passing the value in my var to the subroutine, we're passing the reference to the variable itself. So when we say A equals 5 here, A is going to be referencing my var now, and we're changing the value of my var. So now this will print 5 because we're setting my var to 5 here. And we get 5. And that's pretty much it for creating functions. The more you do it, the easier this is going to get, and you will find more uses later on for why you would need to create your own functions. Typically, you're going to be creating a lot of them if you're like creating any kind of game, especially a more complex game or any kind of application, really. Feel free to ask any questions in the forums if you want further help on this, and I will see you in the next video.